Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Judaism 201. We're going to be talking about this week's parsha, Beha'alos'cha, and one of my favorite drashes on a parsha ever. So I'm going to jump right in. I might as well say the name of it. We're going to talk about the upside down nuns, and also the fact that the Gemara describes 7 books of the Torah. All right, so without further ado, here's the handout that I can send to anybody afterwards if they would like. So in this week's parsha, there is a verse, an extremely famous verse. I bet you everybody here can even sing it. And with my mediocre voice, I will sing the first pasuk. V'hi ben Soraron v'yomer Moshe kuma Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha. Okay, right. So we all know that pasuk. It's sung when we take the Torah out of the ark. And the curious thing about this, you can see that there's actually 2 pasuk, and we only sing the first one, and then we sing some other pasuk. You can see an upside down nun here in the text, and over here. There's 2 pasukim that are bracketed. They almost look like parentheses that that surround these 2 pasukim. And the second graphic here is that the nuns actually appear that way in the text of the Torah, which is kind of strange. I'm not sure if something like that appears anywhere else, at least in the Torah. All right, so let's talk about what the heck these nuns are doing there. So here's a part from the Gemara, and the Gemara is saying, it says a weird thing. It says that I'll read the brackets here from Gemara Shabbos, and the sages taught that this verse V'hi ben Sorah, which I guess I should say what it means in English here. When the ark was set out, Moshe would say, "Arise, Hashem, may your enemies be scattered. Let those who hate you flee before you." And when it rested, he would say, "Return, Hashem, among the myriads of thousands of Israel." So that's what's in the brackets. And in the Gemara here, it says that this pasuk, that Hashem made the signs, made the upside down nuns for this portion, to say that this is not in its place, that it's in the wrong place. I'll read the rest of it later. So that's a pretty weird thing for the Gemara to say. It is the case. We do know that there are disputes regarding in the Torah whether the Torah is written in order or not. The most famous example are the 5 parshas that are at the end of Parshas Shmos. Let's see, Teruma, Tetzave, Kisisa, V'yachel, and Pekude. If you recall, we have 2 parshas, Teruma and Tetzave, that are completely filled with instructions on how to build the Mishkan. Then the third of this sequence of 5 parshas, the third one is Kisisa, where the sin of the golden calf, the Chet Egel. And then the next 2 parshas, V'yachel and Pekude, are when they actually build the Mishkan. And many people do not like those parshas because it's almost a total repetition. The first 2 are the laborious instructions in gory detail of how to build the Mishkan. And then the last 2 parshas are in gory detail, step by step, of how they built the Mishkan according to those gory detailed instructions. So there's a famous debate between Rashi and Rambam about whether those parshas are in order or not. Rashi is of the view that the reason why we have the Mishkan is because we needed a place to focus our devotion because of the Chet Egel, because of the sin of the golden calf. And if we hadn't sinned, we wouldn't have had to build the Mishkan, because we would have been able to focus on an abstract God. But since we needed something concrete, Hashem instructed us said, okay, let's build a mishkan where you can focus your religious, since you need, a physical place to focus your religious energy. We'll build the mishkan. So that's Rashi's view, and Rashi's view is that parsha is out of order. Why Hashem chose to give it in that order is a topic for a different discussion. The Ramban famously disagrees with that. He says, no, the way it happened is the way it's written in order. That's fine. And in other places, we also see things that are out of order. For example, the dedication of the Mishkan appears in 3 different places in the Torah. It occurs at the end of Parshas Shmos. It occurs in Vayikra, and then in Acharei Mos, where it occurs in Vayikra, and it occurs in Parshas Bamidbar. Acharei Mos is where Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's sons, entered the Mishkan and they shouldn't, and they got fried. So we know that things are out of order. However, what's particularly strange here is that the Torah rarely actually makes a mark indicating that things may or may not be in order. Or actually, it never does. So that's very strange. So here we have these marks, and the Gemara says that the parsha doesn't belong in its place. Okay, fine. And then we get to something even stranger, and that is the rest of this number 3 in the handout, which is that Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says that that the 2 nuns are actually encircling the 2 Pesukim is considered a book of itself. We're going to come back to that in a second. That's kind of strange. Let me make it a little bit stranger. So there is this pasuk from Mishlei, from Proverbs. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn, or carved out, I think is what hewn means, her 7 pillars. And twice in the Medrash, in number 5 here, twice we see, and then the Gemara brings it in also, that Ben Kapara interprets that these 7 pillars mean the 7 books of the Torah. So let me just quickly read this out loud. Ben Kapara expounded the verse, wisdom built her house, she has hewn her 7 pillars. This is the Torah. And then a little proof, that the word wisdom means Torah. And then they say, well, wait, aren't there 5 books in the Torah? I mean, after all, we call it a chamesh, right? The word chamesh means 5. So aren't there 5 books? Ben Kapara said, no, actually, the book of Bamidbar, up until these brackets, is 1 book. These 2 verses are another book. And then from after these verses through the rest of Sefer Bamidbar is a 3rd book. And therefore, there are 7 books to the Torah. So there's 2 issues, obviously, that cry out for explanation. Why do we call it a chamesh if it's 7 books? I mean, this is one of the most basic beliefs we have. I mean, even people that don't believe in God believe that the Torah has 5 books. I mean, how can it just say? How can somebody have an opinion that there's 7 books? So that's the first question. The second question is, how do we say that 2 verses make up a whole book? Like, what is going on? So now, so let's talk about how 2 verses can make up a whole book, and then we're going to tie it all together. This Mishnah here requires some introduction. So the rabbis noticed that when people when they were storing the Torah scrolls back in the days of the Beis Hamikdash, they would store the Torah scrolls like in the some back room, with teruma, which is special sanctified food that the Kohanim would eat. And back in those days, they didn't quite have pest control as well as we do in our days. They did not have Terminix's phone number, So rats would come and they would nibble on the food. It was just part of everyday life, regular business loss. But the rats would also nibble on the Torah scrolls, and that was considered extremely disrespectful. So the rabbis are looking for a way to stop people from storing scrolls in with food. So they came up with an ingenious solution. They decreed that all holy writings have a slight degree of tuma associated with them. It's a light degree of tuma, but even something with a light degree of tuma cannot touch the truma food that the Kohanim were eating. So if the Torah scrolls had this slight tuma, then impurity, for lack of there is a complete lack of an English word for tuma, then they would have to store the Torah scrolls somewhere else. And the system worked. So then the question they discuss in this Mishnah, and it comes up in a different context elsewhere. The question is, well, how many letters does the Torah need to, any scroll need to have? Suppose a bunch of letters got erased, or, because of rain or whatever, some of them got washed away. How many letters do you need to have to still call it a valid scroll? So this Mishnah explains. It says here, a scroll that has a writing that become erased and has 85 letters in it. If there's 85 letters that remain, and where do they get those 85 letters? From the parts that are in these nun brackets, as many as there are in the section of Vehi ben Soa. A scroll in which there are 85 letters counts as a scroll. And therefore, so that sort of explains this last sentence where it says defiles the hand. So you get, I should have mentioned that. So if you have this low degree of tuma, then if you touch it, your hands become defiled, and then your hands can't even pick up the truma. You need to wash your hands before you. So anyway, and so the point is that they say, well, if it's got 85 letters or more, then it's a book. And they get that 85 letters from the things that are in those brackets. Another context where this comes up in Gemara Shabbos that I did not put on the sheet is that suppose chas v'shalom there is a fire in your shul on Shabbos and there's no Erev. So you can't, the question is, can you run in and save the Torah scrolls? And the answer is yes. Even though carrying them outside is a violation, you can get your Torah scrolls, but then they have the same question. Well, what if it's a damaged scroll and there's only a couple of letters on it? Can you save those? And they use the same idea. They say, well, if it's got 85 letters or more, because this little section is 85 letters, then it counts as a full scroll and you can save it. Okay. So now we've established that 85 letters that can be a book. So let's now continue on. So why do we have this book in the middle of Sefer Bamidbar? So how we explain it is, if we look at what's going on in Sefer Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, if you look at the whole context, this builds a really nice picture of what's going on. So here's the whole chronology from Yetzias Mitzrayim. So I'm sorry, I'm just going to read it. Read what you see. I know it's not good practice to read from the slide, but I want to go over it. So the Jews leave on the 15th of Nisan, right? That's what we celebrate Pesach on. 50 days later, there's actually machlokas of whether it's the 6th or 7th of Sivan. That's a whole nother topic. That's when Matan Torah occurred. 40 days later, because Moshe was late, the 17th of Tammuz, which today is a fast day, a half-fast day, was the sin of the golden calf, the Chet Egel. So Moshe prays for the nation. It's a little bit unclear of whether he goes up Har Sinai for 40 days or not. Some people say yes, some people say no. In any event, he came back down and then he went up another time for 40 days. And he went up on the 1st of Elul, and that's why Elul is special. Chabad says the king is in the field. It's a whole. It's why we start our preparations for Yom Kippur on the 1st of Elul. We blow the shofar, and that's because Moshe went up again on the 1st of Elul, and he went for 40 days. And he came down on the 10th of Tishrei to say that Hashem has forgiven us, and that's Yom Kippur is that day. That's where Yom Kippur, the date of Yom Kippur, comes from. And then shortly after that, we get the instructions to build the Mishkan, and we start building it. Good. Okay, so we're building it, and I'll skip a little of the chronology, and then we come to the 1st of Nisan on the second year. And that's when we actually inaugurate the Mishkan, and that's what I was just saying before, that appears 3 times in the Torah. And the heads of the tribes contribute for 12 days. That was last week's parsha, right, where each tribe contributed the same thing. It's the longest parsha in the Torah. So that's what was going on in the first 12 days of Nisan. And then the Jews celebrated the second Pesach, or the first Pesach in commemoration since they left Mitzrayim, on the 15th of Nisan. And then there's that little incident where a number of people come up and say, we were tameh, we couldn't do the Korban Pesach, and Hashem says, essentially says, well, since you asked, let's establish Pesach Sheni, and all those Jews get a second chance, and that's the 15th of Iyar. So now it's the 15th of Iyar. So now what? Now, it's very important to consider the narrative from Bnei Yisrael's point of view and from Moshe's point of view. And I say that because it's easy for us to know or to have in mind that they spent 40 years in the desert. But they didn't know that then. I mean, so try to picture yourself, say you're Moshe Rabbeinu right at this point, right? You've dedicated the Mishkan. We've gone through Pesach. We've gone through Pesach Sheni. What is there left to do? I mean, I hope you come up with the answer is go to Eretz Yisrael, right? And in fact, that's what they started to do. I mean, this was going to be great. Moshe was so psyched. The people were so happy. So here we go. This is right before the 2 brackets. In the second year, on the 20th day of the second month. So remember, the Torah counts from the month of Nisan. So it's talking about Iyar, right? So right here, right, we just celebrated Pesach Sheni. Now it's 5 days later, and the cloud lifted, which meant, okay, follow the cloud. We're going. And Bnei Israel set out on their journeys. And then the cloud came to rest in the wilderness of Paran. So that was the first stop. That was the first journey. Everybody was pretty psyched about that. We're going. We are going. And now this is right before our Pesukim here. Moshe says to Chovav, the son of Reuel, the Midianite. So this is probably his brother-in-law, Chovav. And notice the present tense. He says, we are journeying. We're going. We are going to the place that Hashem told us. And it's in the present tense. Highlighted that in the Hebrew too. No seam. We are going. So before I go on, so now let's look in retrospect. What happened? What happened? What happens right after the 2 brackets here? Well, there's 2 terrible things happened. The first thing that happened, which doesn't seem as bad because we weren't directly punished for it, but it was an awful thing. What happened was some people were stirring up trouble, and people started complaining about the meat, that they weren't getting meat. They were only eating mud. It doesn't seem like a lot, but I want to give this analogy here. Suppose you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and for some reason you were unjustly accused of some crime, and you got put away in prison for 5 years. So it's now, and let's make it worse. You're in a faraway place so that you've been unable to see your closest loved ones. So when I say closest loved ones, fill in the blank. Pretend it's either your parents or your spouse or your kids, whatever. You have not seen them for years. And then the president pays you a visit in prison, and he has to speak with you, and he says, you know what? We had the Justice Department look into this case, and it was a travesty of justice. We're very sorry. You're going to come out right now, and we're going to personally drive you to your spouse or whoever, right? So this is great. You're feeling great. And then the president says, and you know what? You can even ride in my limousine. It's really plush, the best, climate control. We're going to ride in my limousine and go straight to your spouse's house so you guys can meet. So then you get in the limousine and you start to go, and you say, man, I'm really hungry. You got any food? And the president says, well, we do have some snacks here. I can give you some pretzels, and we have some soda. And you say, what? Pretzels and soda? What kind of place is this? Back in prison, I had a real meal. What kind of mishigas is this? And what would you do at that point if you were the president, right? You'd go, what are you talking about? I just got you out of prison, and I'm personally driving you to your spouse, and you're complaining about pretzels? So I bring that up because that is apparently how Moshe Rabbeinu viewed what was going on. We are marching to Eretz Yisrael. That was the whole point of everything. We got out of Mitzrayim. We got the Torah. We built the Mishkan. We're just we're just like I think it's 11 days journey into Eretz Yisrael. So 11 days. We're 11 days from the finish line, and they're complaining about that they have man instead of meat, and then they say, we wish we were back in Egypt because the food was better there. And it's at that point Moshe becomes extremely upset. So why he was more upset, much more upset about this than the sin of the golden calf. So let me just take a tangent and explain why. So the sin of the golden calf, and I don't mean to minimize it, but that was a question of how do we worship God? And Moshe understood that the problem was that they had adopted religious practices from Egypt, but he thought, now that they got the Torah will help guide them and teach them how to express their religious practices appropriately. So he went up to Har Sinai. It took him 40 or 80 days to convince Hashem to forgive them. And I'm imagining Moshe Rabbeinu saying, look, it's just a technical violation. They don't know how to worship. We're going to teach them. It'll be fine. It'll be good. But now with this incident, Moshe sees that they have some deep-seated problems. This is not a question of how do you worship. This is a question of extreme self-centeredness, of extreme, not being able to appreciate what they have, no sense of proportion. That going back to the analogy that, having pretzels made it so bad they'd rather be in prison than to see their spouse. I mean, and Moshe at that moment realizes that this generation is not going to make it to the promised land. The problems that the people have are just too deep-seated, that they are going to need to learn Torah for years, it turns out to be 40 years, in order to get this internal schmutz out of them. And then, of course, in next week's parsha comes the more famous horrible thing that happened, which is the sin of the spies. And that's when Hashem announces to everybody, okay, you're spending 40 years in the desert here. All right. So so I want to go back. So before those two terrible things that happened, that's where we're at the Torah. So now let's look at what the commentaries say about this passage. So Vihi ben Sora Aaron, it's right there. The Midrash here is telling us that the brackets are making it a separate book, and then the Midrash adds this comment, and it was hidden. So the book is not 85 letters. There's this is just remnants of the book that was there. So that's what you think here. But this little comment really, actually, let's look at the next comment. I want to praise the Sforno. The Sforno is a commentator from Italy who lived in the late 1400s and the first half of the 1500s. He was a rationalist who tried to write the simple meaning of the Torah, and yet he came up with very creative ideas. He's a great commentator. And he says, let's take a look at what this verse actually says. Vehi ben Sora Aaron, he's saying, right? So what does the English say, right? It says, when they brought the ark, the enemies would scatter. Listen to this brilliant thing he says. He says, this is what should have happened. This is the story of successfully going into Eretz Yisrael. He says that if the spy incident didn't happen, this is how they were going to conquer the land. They were going to bring the ark in, the enemies would scatter, everybody would settle in Eretz Yisrael, Mashiach would come, boom, the whole thing's over. The story's over. And that's his brilliant insight. And to add to that, so let me also add this. This entire shiur actually is based just on this one comment by the Sforno. Apparently, Rav Soloveitchik made a whole hour-long shiur just on those two verses. And then a student of his, or actually the son of a student of his, wrote about it in a book. And I own that book, so I've adapted this his writings in this book to give this shiur. So this is really, the Sforno's comment is really, it's subtle, and it doesn't seem to say a whole lot until you look into it and you look at the whole context. So this really is the source of this entire shiur. It's just this one Sforno comment. To add on to that, let's just look at the last entry I have here. Also from the Gemara Shabbos, back when they talked about that it counted as a book and this and that, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel added one more thing. It says, in the future, this book will be uprooted from here. Or actually, he doesn't call it a book, but he says, this portion will be uprooted from here, and it will be written in its proper place. So now, let's look at what they're talking about here, and we'll tie it up beautifully, in my humble opinion. So the Sforno is saying, what the commentator is saying, that the first pasuk here is the first pasuk of the book that would have been written had we gone into Eretz Yisrael, right? And what does the first pasuk say again? They carry the ark, and the enemies would scatter, right? And so that was them going into Eretz Yisrael, and the whole first book would be all about this missing book, this hidden book, right? The Midrash calls it hidden up here, and this whole book starts off that way, and then I don't know if he directly says this or what people gather from this is that the second sentence in the brackets is the last pasuk of the book. So what's the last pasuk or the second sentence? It says, "Return Hashem, with your myriads and myriads of thousands of Bnei Yisrael." So this is, in a sense, the redemption, the redemption that started with leaving with Yetzias Mitzrayim, this is the completion. We leave Eretz Mitzrayim, we get the Torah, and we march into Israel. Boom, the story's over. Mashiach comes, we're done. Everything's hunky-dory. And that's what the second pasuk is saying. So let's put this all together now and step back. Well, actually, let's ask one more question. So if this is the book that never happened, why is it in the Torah? And I think it's a really inspiring answer to that. I think this Gemara source, which is saying that this last Gemara source here, that in the future it will be uprooted, rooted, and written in its place. What the Sforno might have been saying, what Rav Soloveitchik is saying or did say, is that one day in the future, this phrase will come true. That one day in the future, the book will be fulfilled. And this is the book of the destiny of the Jewish people. It just hasn't happened yet. And it's hidden from us because the future is hidden from us. It was supposed to happen, but it's still in the Torah because it is still in our future. And I think this is a very inspiring message. It says that even when we fail, personally or Bnei Israel, even when we fail, Hashem will not allow us to forget our mission. Even when we deviate from our destiny, when we stray from our proper path, as we did big time in the desert, we are reminded of our mission. There is an entire book of the Torah dedicated to telling this unfinished story and encouraging us to complete it. So this book, this last part in the Gemara here, this last Gemara quote tells us it's in the wrong place right now, but Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is assuring us that indeed the story will be completed and that the Jewish people will reunite with each other and with the land and with the Torah and with Hashem. So next time we take the Torah out of the ark, I think it's a perfect verse for us to sing. And I hope this brings extra meaning to you the next time you're in a shul and people start singing Vehi ben Aaron Vayomer Moshe. And with that, we'll end our shir. So let me close here and we'll stop the recording.